I see my man in the background. Let me go to him. Kidnap is correct. Thank you. Thank you, Vincent. Kidnap is a better word for it. We are joined with the man himself, International Relations Security Analyst, Mark Sleboda. You can find Mark's work on Boosty, Boosty, under Realpolitik with Mark Sleboda, or if you just put in Mark's name, he will appear on the website. All of his videos and work is on that site. Mark, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
Tomorrow. Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show. And I'm pretty depressed and shitty. How are you?
Yeah, angry is probably a better word for it. This is outrageous. Like, and you know, there are a lot of things that you can say outrageous for, but this jumps the shark in regards to the level of outrageousness that is taking place. I was showing them the video of them dragging him through the streets of New York in an open car, like he's some kind of, conquered Roman barbarian driven back through the streets of Rome where people could throw eggs and whatnot. It's very surreal. And again, this goes to this whole thing of there is no such thing as international law. And of course, Trump is looking at Colombia, Cuba, et cetera, now basically saying you better watch your ass. Before we move on to anything else, give me your take on this. How do you view this?
Welcome to the world of Realpolitik.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Might makes right. The law of the jungle, right? The strong countries, the great powers, they do what they can, while the weak countries suffer what they must. That is, the reality. I think it has always been the reality. However, before the U.S. government and its European allies, right, the U.S.-led Western global hegemony, went through a pretense of cloaking it in the correct terminology of liberalism, right? Of spreading this crusade of spreading your democracy is not real. We're going to bring you real democracy, like we have that kind of or weapons of mass destruction, right? Has been in this case there was a half-hearted attempt to throw drugs and somehow immigration on there as a some type of securitization threat, but no one really took that seriously. Not the administration, not the media. I mean, it was mouthed, but it was like saying, Emperor, you have such beautiful clothes, right? I mean, no one in the Western media dared gainsay it, right? But no one really believed it. Even the administration, would quickly veer off subject and start talking about Venezuela's oil and the fact that they were aligned with Russia, China, and Iran as the real reasons why this was done. And I hate to be the Cassandra. I hate to be the black pill bearer, but I have been telling since this flotilla was building up on the coast of Venezuela that this is the way it was going to go down. That the preferred method of regime change would be a CIA regime change, where they would go in and they would contact key figures within the political and military elite, and they would co-opt them through some combination of bribery, blackmail, or threats. And that is quite obvious exactly what happened, right? I did not foresee the actual physical kidnapping of Maduro, but that's almost a technicality, right? He could have easily been shot in the back of the head by someone, and that would have accomplished the same thing without the public humiliation ritual and the exercise of U.S. power. It, like you pointed out, like some kind of Roman triumph, right? Dragging him through the streets. But that's all really kind of, side details. It is quite obvious that there was no organized military resistance to this. The U.S. involved some 150 aircraft in this attack on Venezuela, right? The first almost certainly was a wave of electronic warfare that was powerful jamming, but it would not have prevented things from being fired at all, right? But Venezuela had an air defense that, while it certainly would have been overwhelmed, right, but was not completely insignificant and would have done some damage. They had two S-300 SV air defense systems from Russia. They had a number of Buks, and they had some smaller air defense systems as well. But they also had a flood. They had 5,000 Igla man-pads. 5,000 handheld man-portable air defense systems. Any one of which, right, a team of 10 of them could have taken out that entire helicopter foray in that came and got Maduro and took him out quite easily, right? These are very slow-moving, low-flying targets. Exactly, the easiest primary target of man-portable air defense systems, right? And Venezuela has 5,000 of them. None of them were fired. None of them were used. There was no air defense fire whatsoever. There was no organized resistance from the Venezuelan military whatsoever. There might have been the odd unit that did not get the stand down order, right? But those were small incidences, right? It seems that Maduro, we learned from the New York Times that he already had the habit of moving around from several different places. And of course, the CIA, knew where he was going to be because they were told where he was going to be. And the place he was staying in had a safe house, had a big steel self-contained protection, safety room, whatever you want to call it. But he was in his pajamas when he was captured, right? He didn't even have time to get in there. He was not informed that his country was under attack, quite purposefully. Now, we're hearing some evidence that he had a Cuban personal security detail whose members were all killed in the final assault. So the Cubans fought for him. But it is quite obvious that the Venezuelan military, by the CIA co-opted coup, because that is what happened in Venezuela, was ordered to stand down. They did not fire air defense. They did not fight to protect their president. They effectively handed him over to the Americans, right? They're presenting as this some brilliant military spectacle. Yeah, okay, they flew in on, but they weren't fired on, right? That's what, of course, made it so easy, not by any effective organized, a military resistance. Almost certainly Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president, was in on this. And we've got multiple Western sources already admitting this. The Miami Herald, the New York Times is now reporting that she was seen by the Trump administration as someone that would cooperate with them and that she reached out to them. Almost certainly the defense minister, right, who has done some posturing of his own since we will fight to the end. Right. Okay, whatever, because you didn't fight when it mattered, right? Vladimir Lopez, right? Also, of course, a large number of the senior military personnel of the country also had to be in on this. This was a coup. It was a CIA co-opted coup. I'm sure that at least some of those people involved believed that they were sparing their country the worst, that they were sparing a war and a military occupation, and that this, I'm sure they were told, this is all we want. We just want Maduro. If you just give us him, then, we'll go away and everything will be fine. Of course, they were fools for believing that type of appeasement, right? But what are they going to do now? I mean, we hear posturing, the Bolivarian Revolution, Maduro is our only real president, blah, 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 from Delcy Rodriguez. But it's quite obvious that she was, at least one of the principal people involved in this traitorous, betrayal of her president and her country. And what is she going to do now? Say, but you told me that that was going to be it. Of course, she's not going to do that, because she would be ripped apart by the people but at least some of the people within her own country if she did so, right? She would be an infamous quisling going down in history among all the most infamous quislings. But that is quite obviously the case. And we've heard repeatedly from the Trump administration that they've already talked to her and she'll do what she's told. Mm-hmm. So all of this is, I think I started calling it within a few hours. I'm certainly not the only one who did. There are another of other people, and including some of the people that you talked to who did get this right from the beginning. But now the evidence is starting to trickle in that is just confirming all of this. So once again, this was done in Syria to great effect, right? In cooperation, of course, with Turkish intelligence and Mossad, almost certainly. It was attempted in Iran, right? And it was at least partially effective. And we actually had a real evidence of it there. That was amazing. There was a Washington Post article covering a phone call from a Mossad agent to an Iranian general, where they told him, he I guess recorded it, and it was released, where he was told, we know where your wife and your kid are. Unless you make a video denouncing the government and leave the country, we will kill them, right? That is an example of the threat type of the bribery, blackmail, threat co-option model, right? But that is, one example. In Iran, it wasn't completely successful, at least not the first time, although it seems we're already gearing up for a round 2 on that. It was done in Tripoli, in Libya, at the end, when the commander of the Tripoli defense stood down the defense of the city and brought in the Islamists and the Qatari special forces who were spearheading them at the time. It was done in Iraq in 2003, which has been openly reported on, although it's not generally acknowledged, that a considerable, not all of it, but it was early days of this protocol, shall we say, a considerable portion of the Iraqi military was actually stood down. Their troops were ordered to stand down. So we see this playbook again and again and again, and it is more often than not successful, or at least, somewhat successful. So it wasn't a big leap to understand that they would do this again. And Venezuela is ripe for it. Just like with Syria, their economy has been hollowed out for years, more than a decade now, by U.S. Western sanctions, right? The people, they have, under the shift from the passion for Chavez and the initial phases of the Bolivarian Revolution, have had time to settle into a drastically reduced standard of living, of economic opportunity, of the like, by the heavy pressure of these sanctions regimes. They've hollowed out the economy and hollowed out, thus, the political support, the belief in the Bolivarian Revolution. Not completely, right? No one's saying that there aren't people in Venezuela who believe this. But quite obviously, even among the people at the top, right, the very top, closest to Maduro in power, there were people who were able to be co-opted in the face of this. The Venezuelan military was paid an average of $100 a month, right? Which is, according to the assessments I've seen, 1/5 of what is needed to maintain in Venezuela at a minimal standard a family of 4. That's exactly what happened in Syria.
Wow.
It's very easy to co-opt the military in such a situation. There might have been an initial belief in the Bolivarian Revolution to a very high degree, and among some people, I'm sure there still are. But it was hollowed out for a significant portion of the population under the relentless pressure of U.S. sanctions And the standard pressure cooker strategy for years. Colombia had a right-wing government that was squeezing Colombia. Yeah, that changed recently and actually let off some steam and everything. But this start of this oil blockade, right? However porous it actually was starting to have a pressure effect as well. And again, I believe probably some of the people involved did it for money, and probably some of it, were pressured into it. And probably some of them believed that they were sparing their country the worst and that they could cut a deal with Trump, with the United States. More the fools them.
Yeah. A lot of people, I mean, if I step back from this and present it in a certain way, where you say, as a leader, all right, do I accept the death of, I don't know, 10,000 people, or do I fight what is grotesque adventurism by a foreign illegitimate entity? And
but one that you can't win.
Yes, like this is the Evo Morales debacle, right?
Yeah.
In Honduras, or I'm sorry, Bolivia, where Evo Morales, they said, well, this election is fraudulent. And Evo Morales was either going to fight a civil war or he was going to step down. And a lot of us were like, you can't step down from this. Like your job as a leader puts you in a particular position where you must defend the ideas of the country against predation, which is effectively what this is, especially illegal predation. And if you don't, then you have no sovereignty. This was kind of the Iran dilemma, right? Iran has to defend its sovereignty, otherwise it doesn't have sovereignty.
And we know that Maduro, they attempted multiple times to offer. They keep saying how many they offered him sweetheart deals. They offered him get out of the country, take some money, we'll provide it with you if you don't have it, all kinds of deals, and he rejected them. Right. And that itself, I wondered myself if he would take them. But it seems that Maduro was, if not in general competence, the heir of Maduro. At least he stood by it till the end.
Yeah.
But now it's the end.
What does this mean for the other South American states? And I know you're not a South American expert in a sense.
But but it's pretty obvious, right? I mean,
right.
How many times has Trump already threatened Colombia with the same? I mean, I've lost count already. That basically calling out the Colombian president for objecting to all of this and saying, "You're next. You're a sick man, another narco terrorist. We're taking you out next." Mexico has been threatened multiple times already, and Cuba. I mean, that's a given. I mean, that's for Marco Rubio, of course, whom is driving all of this. The political intent in Washington, right, behind this to a very high degree. Venezuela is just a stepping stone to Cuba. But it's also, of course, a chilling message to the rest of Argentina. We control this hemisphere completely, right? That is the Trump corollary toward the Monroe Doctrine, or, I mean, just beating the memes already. Trump himself openly saying the Don Roe Doctrine, right? Like some mafia warlord.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Brazil, Lula, what? I mean, if anyone had the responsibility in South and Central America, right, in Latin America, to be the one to at least politically, at least rhetorically, rally the hemisphere as the largest and greatest economic power in South America, as a member of BRICS, they had a responsibility to speak out against this for months, to rally political support, to at least decry it. No one expects, because Brazil is not a military power, for them to do anything to stop it. But they didn't even galvanize South and Central America politically right, against this. And if they couldn't be bothered to do that in their own backyard, well, then what? I mean, people have absolutely ridiculous expectations on Russia, China, and Iran, right? On the literally each of them on the other side of the world from this, on what they could, they couldn't do anything militarily to stop this, right? And I mean, again, the same situation as with Syria at the end. Well, surely Russian intelligence also understands what happened there. How are they going to defend the Venezuelan leader, when the Venezuelan government itself sells out their own president to the United States? I mean, what can they do in that situation, or what can the Chinese do? And we know that, I mean, the Chinese envoy was the last.
Just there.
He was just there. He was the last public meeting Maduro had, right? Hours before all of this happened. And that, of course, is a message and a gauntlet thrown down to China on top of already seizing oil tankers that, while maybe not owned by China, were on their way to China when they were seized. So I'm sure there are people within the bowels of the deep state that are looking at this as a geopolitical chess match, and they're saying, "Oh, you're not going to stop your attempt to reflip our, night in Ukraine. You won't stop? Okay, well then we're going to take out Nepal, and we're going to take out Syria, and bam, there's Venezuela too, and all its oil. How you like that?" We're in a geopolitical war, a World War III right now, and this is being fought all over the planet. It is for the future world order, and these are a number of pawns and lower pieces that are being quickly removed from the board in rapid succession.
Well, I'm curious on. I mean, mind you, this is taking place openly, unabashedly, while the U.S. is supposedly in a quote unquote negotiation with the Russians. And on some level, this is aimed at Russia and this is aimed at China. I mean, China and Russia's relationships.
And Iran.
And Iran, all of which have relationships with Venezuela. And now Venezuela has, for lack of a better term, been taken off the chessboard. How are the Russians going to view this in any kind of negotiation with Trump? Or is this just not going to factor and not come up one way or the other?
I mean, add this, because in the last week since we've talked, we've had these revelations. I mean, I've talked about it, and Brian Berletic and a few others have, that all of these drone attacks on Russian refineries, all of these drone attacks on civilian shipping into and doing trade with Russia, these drone attacks on tankers and the like, that was all directed, that could not have been done without the CIA. I've said that, Brian Berletic and others have said that, and now it's been revealed. Not only was it facilitated, but it was actually directed. And the CIA, they went into such detail as they instructed the Ukrainians on which refineries to hit and how to specifically target a particular coupler that would lead to longer downtime before repairs could be effected, because it was a harder part to replace. This is openly printed in the New York Times. That while at the same time they were presenting themselves as neutral moderators of this, as attempting to end this conflict, diplomatically, and the appearance that the Pentagon at least actively was stepping back, even if they were pushing the Europeans forward with their own weapons. But then we find out that Donald Trump gave the green light and was very happy with the CIA escalating the war in a way that has never been done before against Russia, in an attempt to force them to the table on American terms, to end the conflict and preserve this anti-Russian U.S. clients, putsch in Kiev. the Russians have certainly known about this all along. Again, we suspected it. Now it cannot be denied any longer. And almost certainly, if the CIA was behind the Ukrainian drone attacks against the refineries, and if they were behind the Kiev regime's drone attacks against shipping, 99.9% certainty they were behind the drone assassination attempt against Putin that occurred last week, right?
Yes.
This is the CIA war against Russia. Now, Russia understands all of this. Does that mean they're going to end the diplomatic dance with the United States? No, because they have to, because the U.S. is still first among great powers, right? A fading hegemon, a fading hyperpower, but they still have to play the game, right? And if only for the sake of these still, shall we say, reluctant BRICS members like India, like Brazil, who don't want to recognize the global war that they themselves are, whatever they believe that they can sit this one out, they can't. The U.S. will force them eventually to one side or the other. They've made that clear many times already. But Russia still believes that they have to play the elder statesman in the room. But I have to tell you that particularly after what has happened in Venezuela and the revelations of the assassination attempt against Putin, there are a lot of Russians on the general public, the Telegram channels, and almost certainly among the political elite, saying, why are we fighting with international laws and norms and at least, fighting to some degree with kids' gloves on, an attempt to keep this above board? Why are we maintaining a moral high ground, a legalistic, international legalistic high ground, when it is doing us no good? And we see that the principal adversary, right, the Iranian great Satan, if you will, that is behind all of this, just rolls over everything themselves. I mean, and goes right for the decapitation strike, one way or another. And that's what they did in Iran. They attempted to do. That's what they did in Syria, and that's what they just did in Venezuela as well. And there's a lot of bitterness about that.
Question. Yeah, that's a hell of a question. It's apt. It's a very apt question. I'm curious from the standpoint of the media there and the commentary that's coming out. Putin was already getting pressure on this point.
Yep.
Why are we pretending to be in these negotiations? Why are we pretending why are we pretending that the United States is acting as a deal maker and prosecuting the war simultaneously when we know that's not the case? Has there been, let's say, a shift even from the government on that question, or not so much?
So yes, Russia is, first of all, let's just say that Russia is playing this diplomatic game. And I believe, of course, they will continue to play it because they have to. And there are multiple reasons for that. However, that may stick in your gut and you may find it morally offensive, like I do, right? I'm sure many others do. Just to even pretend to talk to the Americans at this point is offensive. Russia will continue to do it because they have to, diplomatically with regards to the global South, and to some degree because the America is so powerful still, economically, militarily, politically. But keep in mind that they have never once let that diplomatic game interfere with what their military is doing on the ground. And ultimately, that's the most important thing, right? They haven't declared any ceasefires. They haven't, the last one they did was this brief one over energy infrastructure strikes for 30 days. back in February, so when Trump first came into office, and that was within the Russian military didn't need ultimately to make any energy infrastructure strikes for 30 days at that time. It was then a once a month attack that was occurring, and they had just done an attack, so they could do damage assessment for a month before there was the military need for another one. So even that was not any real sacrifice that they were making, but ultimately Russia is continuing, right? Like a dog or a wolf or a lion, with a death grip on its opponent's throat. They're not letting go. And that diplomatic game has not been allowed to interfere with that. That will continuing. And that's part of the reason for the U.S., I believe, anger and fury and odd escalation here and there and everywhere. I think to some degree, the decision to go after Venezuela in such a way was almost certainly, to some degree, a consequence of Russia refusing to end the conflict in Ukraine on American terms.
If this was Cuba, what do you think? Obviously, Cuba and the Soviet Union has a certain relationship,
yes,
going back prior.
Yes.
And even though, as you pointed out before, Russia's not going to get into a standoff with the United States over Venezuela, but the same thing hold true for Cuba, especially considering Cuba is in.
It's simply logistics. It's simply logistics. Russia doesn't have the ability to power project into the Western Hemisphere. People don't understand that. I mean, there's always this thing where, half the people try to make the Russian military out to be 100% completely incompetent, incapable of anything, while other people imagine it's
superhuman,
a greater superpower than the Soviet Union in military terms at the time was. And neither of those things are true. Russia has a very competent land military force right now, the best air defense and electronic warfare in the world, right? They're right now, at least, riding the crest as the dominant drone power in terms of production and experience, actual combat experience. But they can't project power into the Western Hemisphere. They don't have fleets of aircraft carriers and the like, and that would provoke a nuclear confrontation with the United States. Now, there is a legacy because there was a deal struck in the Cuban Missile Crisis over Cuba, right, by Russia's legal predecessor, the Soviet Union, that America would not attempt to militarily overthrow the government in Cuba again, right? That they attempted lots of times to assassinate the leadership and to promote, color revolution type regime change in Cuba, but they haven't tried to militarily seize Cuba again since the failed, Bay of Pigs disaster and then the Cuban Missile Crisis after it. And that has held through even as the Soviet Union dissolved and Russia took its place. But we're entering a new phase of worldwide geopolitical conflict. And I don't believe that Cuba is protected anymore under the legacy of that arrangement. Now, Russia will feel more affronted if the U.S. goes after Cuba in a big way again, because they believe that they had a legacy agreement with the U.S. on that regard. But surely at this time, they can't even expect that the U.S. would hold to anything, particularly an agreement that was made with the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union was still a rival superpower, right, at the height of the Cold War. But ultimately, Russia will not be able to protect Cuba if the U.S. goes after it in a big way in the next 3 years. And 3 years is a long time. And I mean, even after 3 years, there's no guarantee that the next U.S. president, wouldn't go about it as well. So yes, I mean, you've heard Mark Rubio and Trump and others say it, that that if I were the leadership in Cuba, I would be decamping, and as Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, in his frat boy best, so eloquently pointed, "F around and find out." Right? I mean, that's his the U.S. I mean, it has always been that role, but there was a mask before, and now the U.S. is just so blatantly a mafia warlord, right? In its style of geopolitical hegemony, that even the Europeans blush at this point. They're like, but you're supposed to pretend, right? You're supposed to throw out their words like democracy more often, right?
Game.
Yeah. The interviews that you've seen with the European leaders, with Keir Starmer, with the French over the last week, they're like, yeah, we're glad Maduro is gone, but we still believe in international law, and yeah. I mean, that's exactly what the awkward conversations that have occurred in every interview I've seen with a European leader. And at the bottom of every one of those is Trump's constant comments about Greenland being America's, and the Europeans cringing, of course, because that mafia warlord style of what's yours is ours is constantly now being hinted at. And what are the Europeans going to do if that is turned on them as well? And Trump just land. I mean, U.S. already has more troops in Greenland than Denmark does. I mean, it's not it's not hard to see Trump mocking Denmark over the weekend that their idea of additional security was an extra dog sled theme, right? And so forth. And it's quite obvious why he wants Greenland for the Arctic war.
Right.
It's is the next new front of this geopolitical war with Russia, but with Russia, China, because they're allied, and they want a increased Arctic presence, and they want to militarize the whole thing. And of course, there are natural resources there that can be developed with enough investment, but that would require a large amount of investment.
With Venezuela being taken, do you think Greenland is in prize? That this is like a shot of Viagra, and the Trump administration is in their mind.
Oh, sure.
Hey, they can't do anything about it anyway.
There's no way that they can't be riding a high off of this and feeling their strength. And in a way, this was because Trump, they failed to overthrow the government in Iran and had to. However, they tried to phrase what happened, right? Drop some bombs, declare victory, and go home. You could go back further than that, and the failed attempt to play whack-a-mole against the Houthis in Yemen. And Yemen is the perfect example that you are capable of resistance if you are willing to pay the price. And the Houthis have nothing, the Aran Salah movement, and they fought off the United States. But the government, the military in Venezuela was not willing to go down that road.
Yeah.
But so Trump, defeated in relative terms, right, considering the power imbalance by the Houthis in Yemen, failing to get regime change in Iran and having to put on this performance theater to claim victory over it, losing a trade war badly with China and having to back down over all of this, and failing after personal engagement with Trump over months to force Russia to end this conflict on American terms in Ukraine. They wanted a victory. And so we've said it before. I've said it on your show. Low hanging fruit. Venezuela was the easy, low hanging fruit right in their own hemisphere, a government, an economy that had already been hollowed out by U.S. sanctions, and that Russia, China, and Iran couldn't do anything about from, their geopolitical position on the other side of the world. But now this is going to embolden them even more, right? There was for Trump was never ideologically against regime change. He was against the failures of regime change. And now they're saying it openly. All those other times, they did it badly. I do it perfectly. Now there's going to be Trump. I mean, at this point, the CIA is going to have to hold Trump back because Trump is going to be Colombia, Mexico, Cuba, Nigeria, and anyone. He's going to go off on this because he is going to be high on a victory moment here. And it must be said that the story in Venezuela is not completely over. I expect over time some form of leftist guerrilla movement to emerge, right, in Venezuela, but with the understanding that first and foremost, they'll have to fight the new Venezuelan comprador government, the military, right? You will have Venezuelan leftist guerrillas who will have to fight the Venezuelan military first, because quite obviously there is going to be a transitional government of one form or another. And I had thought they would immediately bring the Venezuelan opposition in and try to declare some type of transition government. And I said as much days ago already, but they're not even bothering with that. They're going right for the colonial administration, right? Right for Rubio and whoever his handpicked, proconsul is, to rule over Venezuela. And they're not making any secret about it. So, and the killer was the complete dismissal of Machado now that she is now that she's no longer, a useful tool in their toolbox. Oh, she never had any support anyway. She never had any support or respect in Venezuela anyway. And the Norwegians are like, but we gave her the Nobel Prize because of all the support she had in Venezuela, right?
Fool you. Yeah.
Yeah, more fools all of you, right? Machado thought she was going to be ruling Venezuela.
That is so wild. That was honestly, if any of it was funny, that was the only thing.
That was comedic gold. I mean, It's black humor, right? You have to find these things that you can laugh about all of this. But all of these fools who think they can appease this beast or use this beast or ride this beast or whatever, make a deal with this beast that is the United States. How many proxies, from the Kurds to the, how many have we seen thrown under the wheels of this beast? And there's never anyone not willing to step up to be the next, blood lubricant for that beast's wheels, is there?